If you're booked again to go back and speak to essentially the same audience, how can you vary the story that you've used? This was a question that was put to me by one of my clients. She has a very compelling story of how she set up her charity. And that story is that story. She can't change that story. But charities in particular, I think, are very often asked to go and back to speak to the same group, because these will often be groups that support that charity and they want to hear from the founder or from somebody from the charity again at their, I don't know, their annual meeting or their dinner dance or whatever it is the following year. So she said, how can I make it more interesting so that I'm not telling the same old story? Because very often 80% of the audience will have heard it. So I think the first thing to say is that actually, if it's just the second time, I don't think there's any problem in repeating the story. Yes, 80% will have heard it. They won't have remembered every single nuance to your story. So I don't think there's any harm in repeating it for a second time, because bear in mind, you've got a percentage that haven't heard it. If you are going back again and again and again, then the suggestion I gave her was to spotlight a particular section of that story. So what I mean by that, there was a part of her story where she went to live as part, she was sponsored to go and live in somewhere in Scandinavia, but that's as much as she would have said about it in the original story. So I suggested to her that she focused on that part of the story and what that meant for her and how that eventually contributed to her making the decision to launch the charity, because every step of her story will have had some impact and will have been part of that journey. So focusing, spotlighting on a different section of the story. And you can get around that by saying, I've already told this group the story about how I did this, this and this in the early part of my life. So to vary it a little bit, I thought I would focus on this, so that you're covering the story very briefly for the people that haven't heard it before. And you might do it at a little bit more length than I've just demonstrated, but then come up with something fresh that you haven't told that audience before. If you want any help with constructing that speech from the start, I can certainly help you with that. So I would love to have a call with you to explore how I can help you. But I hope that's useful to get you started.